The moment before dawn is often the darkest, the quietest, the most uncertain. It is the hour when the night still holds its grip, when the sky gives no visible promise of light, and yet, deep beneath the horizon, the sun is already rising. You cannot see it, you cannot feel its warmth yet, but its movement is unstoppable. In the same way, there are seasons in life when nothing around you seems to signal breakthrough, when your prayers feel suspended in the air, when progress feels painfully slow, and hope feels like a fragile whisper. But what if the silence is not abandonment? What if the pressure is not punishment? What if the waiting is not delay, but divine preparation? What if the very tension you feel right now is the evidence that God is aligning your life for a blessing greater than you imagined? God rarely announces his blessings with noise. He prepares them in hidden places, in unseen processes, in quiet transformations of the heart. The seed does not explode into a tree overnight. It disappears into the soil first. It is buried in darkness, pressed by the weight of the ground, soaked in moisture that almost feels like suffocation. Yet everything that looks like burial is actually planting. Everything that feels like loss is often the beginning of multiplication. When God is preparing you for a blessing, he often allows you to walk through seasons that challenge your comfort, stretch your faith, and refine your character. The blessing is coming, but first you must become the person who can carry it. Discomfort is often misunderstood as a sign that something is wrong, that you have taken a wrong step, made a wrong decision, or somehow drifted away from God's plan. But in the spiritual journey, discomfort is frequently one of the clearest indicators that God is actively working in your life, moving you from where you are into where you're meant to be. When God prepares someone for a blessing, he rarely allows them to remain comfortable in old patterns, old environments, and old limitations. Comfort can quietly become a cage. It feels safe, familiar, and predictable, but it can also prevent growth, vision, and obedience. God's love is too intentional to leave you trapped in what is merely familiar when he has something greater prepared for you. That inner restlessness you feel, the sense that something must change even when you cannot fully explain why, is often the whisper of divine redirection. What once satisfied you begins to feel empty. Conversations you once enjoyed no longer nourish your spirit. Environments that once felt like home now feel restrictive. Your heart begins craving more meaning, more purpose, more depth. This is not confusion. This is awakening. God gently disrupts your comfort so you can recognize that you have outgrown certain spaces. Just as a child eventually outgrows old clothes, your spirit outgrows certain seasons, habits, and mindsets. Staying too long in what once fit can limit what God wants to develop next. Discomfort forces movement. If everything always felt easy and pleasant, there would be little motivation to change, to seek God more deeply, or to step into unknown territory. Growth demands transition, and transition always involves uncertainty. When God redirects your path, he does not always provide the full map at once. He often gives just enough light for the next step. This is where faith is activated. Faith learns to trust God, not only when the destination is clear, but when the journey itself feels unfamiliar. Discomfort becomes the doorway through which courage, obedience, and trust are born. Many people resist discomfort because it exposes vulnerability. It reminds us that we do not have full control, that we cannot manage every outcome, and that we must rely on God's wisdom rather than our own understanding. But surrender is not weakness, it is alignment. When you release your grip on what is familiar, you create space for God to introduce what is transformative. What feels like loss is often God making room for increase. What feels like instability is often God shifting your foundation to something stronger and more secure. Discomfort also challenges identity. When familiar labels, roles, or expectations begin to fall away, you may feel unsure of who you are becoming. Yet this is a necessary part of spiritual maturation. God removes outdated definitions so you can step into your true calling. If you cling to old identities, you may miss the new assignments God is trying to reveal. The discomfort you feel is not meant to destroy your confidence. It is meant to refine it. It pushes you to root your worth not in routine, approval, or performance, but in your relationship with God. Often, divine redirection does not arrive with dramatic signs or loud instructions. It arrives quietly through uneasiness, loss of interest, shifting desires, and a growing sense that something more is ahead. This subtle guidance protects you from making premature decisions driven by fear or impulse. Instead, it invites you into prayer, reflection, and sensitivity to God's voice. Discomfort becomes a compass pointing you toward alignment rather than comfort. It is important to understand that not every uncomfortable moment is negative. Some discomfort is corrective, guiding you away from what no longer serves your purpose. Some discomfort is constructive, stretching you toward growth and maturity. Some discomfort is protective, preventing you from settling in environments that would limit your future. When viewed through spiritual perspective, discomfort becomes evidence of God's involvement rather than his absence. However, discomfort also requires discernment. It calls for patience, prayer, and wisdom rather than impulsive reactions. God's redirection does not always mean immediate change. Sometimes it means gradual preparation. The key is to remain open, teachable, and sensitive to what God is shaping inside you. When your heart stays humble and attentive, discomfort becomes a powerful teacher rather than a source of fear. As you embrace this process, you begin to recognize that comfort was never meant to be your destination. Purpose is your destination. Growth is your assignment. Transformation is your calling. God's redirection may challenge your preferences, stretch your patience, and test your trust, but it always leads toward greater alignment with his will. The uneasiness you feel today may be the confirmation that tomorrow's blessing is already in motion. Instead of resisting discomfort, learn to lean into it with faith. Ask what God is revealing, what he is shifting, and what he is preparing you to receive. Trust that if he is disturbing your comfort, he is also designing your future. The same God who allowed the restlessness will guide the next step. When you follow his leading rather than clinging to familiarity, you step into divine flow, spiritual maturity, and prepared blessing. Discomfort is not your enemy. It is often your invitation into the next chapter of God's purpose for your life. Stretching is one of the most intentional ways God prepares a person to carry a future blessing. Before expansion comes pressure, and before promotion comes growth. God never releases something greater into a life that has not developed the strength, wisdom, and faith to sustain it. When God stretches you, he places you in situations that feel bigger than your natural ability, beyond your comfort zone and outside your usual control. You may feel inadequate, uncertain, or even afraid. But these emotions are not signs of failure. They are evidence that you are standing on the edge of growth. Stretching awakens dependence on God and shifts confidence away from self-reliance into spiritual trust. When everything in life feels manageable, faith often remains passive. But when God introduces challenges that stretch your capacity, faith becomes active. You are forced to pray differently, listen more closely, and lean more fully on God's wisdom. Stretching teaches you how to walk by faith rather than by familiarity. It trains your spirit to trust God even when logic does not fully make sense. In these moments, you learn that God's strength operates most powerfully when human strength feels insufficiency. Weakness becomes an invitation for divine power to operate. Stretching also expands vision. You begin to see possibilities that once felt unreachable. Your perspective shifts from what you can control to what God can accomplish. Fear often rises during this phase because growth disrupts comfort and predictability. But courage develops when you choose obedience despite uncertainty. Every step taken in faith builds spiritual muscle. What once felt impossible gradually becomes manageable because your capacity increases through consistent trust and obedience. God often stretches you relationally, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. He may place you in environments that require greater patience, maturity, leadership, or responsibility. You may be asked to forgive when it feels uncomfortable, to serve when it feels inconvenient, to speak when it feels intimidating, or to wait when it feels frustrating. These moments shape character and discipline. They refine emotional stability and spiritual endurance. Blessings require stability, not just excitement. Without stretching, sudden increase can overwhelm rather than bless. Stretching also exposes limitations and weaknesses. This is not to shame you, but to strengthen you. When you recognize where you are weak, you become more intentional about seeking God's guidance and growth. You begin to develop humility, resilience, and teachability. Pride shrinks under stretching, while wisdom expands. The areas that once felt fragile begin to grow strong through practice and faithfulness. There are seasons when stretching feels uncomfortable because it challenges old patterns and habits. God may interrupt routines that kept you stagnant. He may invite you to try new approaches, think differently, or release old fears. These changes may feel unsettling at first, but they create flexibility and adaptability. A rigid life breaks under pressure, but a flexible life grows stronger. Stretching develops spiritual elasticity so you can adjust to future opportunities without losing stability. Sometimes stretching involves delayed gratification. God teaches you patience by allowing growth to unfold gradually rather than instantly. This prevents entitlement and builds appreciation. When you wait for something you have prayed for, your gratitude deepens and your stewardship improves. You learn to value process rather than chasing only results. This mindset protects you from impulsive decisions and shallow faith. Stretching also deepens intimacy with God. As you face challenges that exceed your strength, prayer becomes more sincere, worship becomes more meaningful, and scripture becomes more alive. You are no longer seeking God only for comfort, but for guidance, strength, and transformation. Relationship replaces routine. Faith becomes relational rather than transactional. This closeness sustains you when pressure increases and responsibility expands. Many people resist stretching because they fear failure or disco. But spiritual growth always requires risk. Staying comfortable may feel safe, but it limits potential. God's stretching is always purposeful and measured. He never pushes you beyond what his grace can sustain. Each stretch prepares you for the next level of responsibility, influence, and blessing. The discomfort you feel today is developing the endurance you will need tomorrow. Stretching also strengthens discipline. You become more intentional with time, priorities, and choices. You learn to manage pressure without losing peace. Emotional maturity increases as reactions become more thoughtful and less impulsive. Spiritual discernment grows as you learn to recognize God's leading more clearly. These qualities protect the blessing from being mismanaged or misused. As stretching continues, confidence gradually replaces fear. You begin to realize that you are capable of more than you once believed, not because of your own strength, but because of God's faithfulness. Each victory builds courage. Each lesson builds wisdom. Each challenge builds stability. The stretching season may feel demanding, but it is producing lasting strength within you. When the blessing finally arrives, it will not overwhelm you. You will recognize that the stretching prepared you to carry it with humility, gratitude, and responsibility. You will understand that the pressure was shaping you rather than punishing you. The challenges were building capacity rather than limiting potential. The stretching was God's way of preparing you, not just to receive the blessing, but to sustain it, steward it, and allow it to produce lasting impact in your life and in the lives of others. There are seasons in life when God gently pulls you away from noise, familiar voices, and constant activity, not to punish you, but to prepare you. Isolation is often misunderstood as loneliness or rejection, yet spiritual isolation is a divine invitation into clarity, healing, and strength. When God is preparing you for a blessing, he often reduces external distractions so your inner life can become more focused and aligned. The crowd can amplify confusion, but the quiet strengthens discernment. In the stillness, you begin to recognize God's voice more clearly than you ever could in the noise of constant motion. Isolation reveals what truly drives your heart. When external affirmation fades and familiar routines shift, you are confronted with your motivations, insecurities, and hidden fears. This is not meant to discourage you, but to heal you. God uses solitude to address emotional wounds that busyness often hides. In quiet moments, you begin to process past disappointments, unresolved grief, unspoken bitterness, and forgotten dreams. Healing flows where attention is given. God gently repairs what has been neglected so your future will not be burdened by unresolved pain. In isolation, your prayer life deepens because you are no longer leaning on human reassurance. You begin to rely on God for guidance, comfort, and wisdom. Conversations with God become more honest, more vulnerable, and more authentic. You are no longer performing spirituality for others. You are cultivating intimacy with God. This closeness strengthens spiritual confidence and sensitivity. You begin to recognize subtle promptings, gentle corrections, and quiet encouragements that shape your decisions and direction. Isolation also clarifies identity. Without constant comparison or social expectations, you rediscover who you are apart from roles, labels, and approval. God reminds you that your worth is rooted in relationship, not performance. This grounding protects you from insecurity and pride when blessings increase. When identity is secure, success does not inflate ego and failure does not destroy confidence. God establishes internal stability before external elevation. During isolation, focus becomes sharper. Distractions decrease, priorities realign. You begin to recognize what truly matters and what has been draining unnecessary energy. Time becomes more intentional. Decisions become more thoughtful. Discipline strengthens because fewer external influences compete for your attention. This mental clarity prepares you to manage future responsibilities with wisdom and balance rather than chaos and burnout. Isolation also strengthens resilience. When you learn to stand alone with God, you develop emotional independence rather than unhealthy dependence on people. You learn to process disappointment without bitterness, uncertainty without panic, and delay without despair. This emotional maturity becomes essential when leadership, responsibility, or influence increases. Blessings often bring pressure, expectations, and scrutiny. Isolation prepares you to remain grounded when external voices become louder. Sometimes isolation feels uncomfortable because it exposes silence. Silence forces reflection. Reflection reveals truth. Truth invites transformation. God uses this quiet space to correct attitudes, refine motives, and reshape vision. Old patterns that once felt normal become questionable. New values begin to emerge. Integrity strengthens. Wisdom grows. This internal transformation cannot be rushed or forced. It develops gradually through consistent alignment with God. Isolation also nurtures creativity and vision. Without constant input from others, your mind becomes free to explore ideas, dreams, and possibilities that may have been buried under routine. God often speaks vision in stillness because distraction drowns inspiration. You begin to sense direction more clearly, even if the full picture is not yet revealed. Seeds of future purpose are planted quietly in these hidden seasons. It is important to understand that isolation does not mean permanent separation from people. It is a temporary season designed for preparation. Just as seeds grow underground before they emerge into the light, God allows growth to happen privately before public fruit. It becomes visible. The hidden season builds depth, authenticity, and spiritual authority. When you eventually re-enter broader influence, you carry wisdom that cannot be learned in crowds. Isolation also teaches contentment. You learn to find joy and peace independent of constant stimulation or approval. This emotional stability becomes a strong foundation for future success. Contentment protects you from striving, comparison, and burnout. It allows you to enjoy blessings without becoming dependent on them for identity or happiness. At times, isolation may feel misunderstood by others. People may not recognize the value of your quiet season. They may question your absence or misinterpret your withdrawal. But divine preparation does not always make sense to those who are not walking your path. Trust that God sees the full picture. What he is developing privately will eventually produce public fruit. As isolation continues, gratitude grows for small things, deeper moments, quiet victories, and internal breakthroughs. You become more aware of God's daily presence rather than only dramatic moments. Faith becomes steady rather than emotional. Stability replaces anxiety. Confidence grows quietly rather than loudly. When the season of isolation begins to lift, you will notice a renewed clarity, strengthened faith, emotional healing, and sharpened vision. You will not return the same person you were before. You will carry depth, wisdom, and stability that equips you to handle the blessing God has prepared. The quiet that once felt lonely will reveal itself as sacred. The separation that once felt uncomfortable will be recognized as protection and preparation. Isolation refines the inner world so the outer world can flourish. It strengthens the roots so the branches can grow without collapsing. It deepens relationship with God so success does not replace intimacy. It stabilizes identity so promotion does not distort purpose. When embraced with trust and humility, isolation becomes one of God's most powerful tools for preparing a life to receive lasting, meaningful blessing. Resistance often feels like an unwelcome interruption. a sudden weight pressing against progress, a wall appearing where a door once seemed open. Many people interpret resistance as a sign that something is wrong, that they have missed God's direction, or that they should turn back. But in the spiritual journey, resistance frequently confirms that you are moving towards something meaningful. When God is preparing you for a blessing, pressure often increases because purpose attracts opposition. Valuable things are guarded. Significant breakthroughs require perseverance. If nothing important were ahead, there would be little reason for resistance to arise. Resistance exposes the seriousness of your calling. It forces you to decide whether your faith is rooted in convenience or conviction. When things flow easily, commitment is rarely tested, but when challenges multiply, endura. NCE develops. Resistance strengthens spiritual muscles that comfort could never build. It teaches you to stand firm when emotions fluctuate, when circumstances shift, and when answers are not immediate. Stability in adversity prepares you to remain steady when success increases. Opposition sharpens discernment. You become more aware of what truly matters and what distractions must be ignored. Resistance demands clarity of purpose because wandering becomes costly. Focus intensifies. Prayer becomes more intentional. Decisions become more disciplined. The noise of unnecessary options fades when pressure clarifies priorities. God uses resistance to refine vision and strengthen alignment with His will. Resistance also exposes inner weaknesses. Fear surfaces. Doubt speaks louder. Insecurity attempts to resurface. These reactions are not signs of failure. They are invitations for growth. God allows pressure to reveal areas that still need healing, strengthening, and surrender. What surfaces under pressure must be addressed before promotion arrives. Unresolved fear can distort opportunity. Unchecked pride can sabotage influence. Unhealed wounds can fracture relationships. Resistance brings hidden issues into the light so they can be healed rather than carried into the next season. Endurance is formed through resistance. Perseverance is not developed through comfort, but through consistent faith in adversity. Every obstacle you overcome strengthens confidence in God's faithfulness. Each challenge you survive builds spiritual resilience. You begin to trust not only in God's promises, but also in His sustaining power. This endurance protects future blessings from collapsing under pressure. Resistance teaches humility. When progress requires patience and dependence, pride loses control. You learn to rely on God rather than your own strength, intelligence, or influence. This humility keeps your heart grounded when opportunities expand. Without humility, success becomes dangerous. With humility, success becomes stewardship rather than entitlement. There are moments when resistance feels unfair or exhausting. Delays test patience. Misunderstandings challenge emotional maturity. Unexpected setbacks stretch faith. Yet even in these moments, God remains active. He is shaping perseverance, refining character, strengthening discernment, and aligning timing. What feels slow is often strategic. God protects you from premature exposure and unprepared responsibility. Resistance also strengthens prayer life. When pressure increases, dependence deepens. Prayer shifts from routine words to sincere conversation. You seek God's wisdom more intentionally. You listen more attentively. You learn to wait rather than rush. This spiritual sensitivity becomes essential for long-term stability. Blessings without spiritual sensitivity can create confusion and pride. Resistance anchors you in dependence rather than independence. Another powerful aspect of resistance is that it, company, affirms spiritual value. Opposition rarely attacks what carries no impact. Pressure often surrounds assignments that will influence others, shift environments, or advance purpose. The enemy resists what threatens darkness. While resistance is uncomfortable, it often confirms that God is moving you toward meaningful influence and growth. Resistance also strengthens boundaries. You learn what to protect, what to release, and where to invest energy. Discernment improves. Not every opportunity deserves attention. Not every conflict requires engagement. Wisdom grows through experience. These boundaries preserve peace, focus, and clarity as responsibility increases. Sometimes resistance comes through people rather than circumstances. Criticism, misunderstanding, or lack of support can feel deeply discouraging. But even relational resistance teaches emotional intelligence, patience, forgiveness, and humility. God uses these moments to shape your responses, not just your results. How you respond to resistance reveals the depth of your maturity and faith. Resistance reminds you that growth is rarely comfortable. Expansion requires pressure. Transformation demands perseverance. The discomfort you feel is not meant to stop you, but to strengthen you. When you learn to interpret resistance correctly, fear loses power and faith grows stronger. As you continue pressing forward through resistance, confidence develops, not arrogance, but quiet assurance rooted in God's faithfulness. You begin to trust that obstacles are temporary, that pressure has purpose, and that endurance produces lasting fruit. You recognize that the same God who allowed the resistance will also provide the breakthrough. When the blessing finally unfolds, you will carry wisdom, humility, endurance, and spiritual maturity that only resistance could develop. You will steward success with gratitude rather than entitlement. You will navigate influence with discernment rather than impulse. You will remain anchored when storms arise again. Resistance will no longer intimidate you because you will understand that pressure prepared you for purpose. Resistance does not mean retreat. It means refinement. It means strengthening. It means confirmation that something valuable is ahead. When you continue walking in faith despite obstacles, you align yourself with God's process and positioning. The pressure that once felt heavy becomes proof that God has been shaping you for a future that requires strength, stability, and unwavering trust. Before God elevates a person outwardly, he always works inwardly. Outer success without inner stability creates imbalance. But when the heart is aligned, the blessing becomes sustainable, meaningful, and impactful. Inner transformation is one of the clearest signs that God is preparing you for a blessing. You may begin to notice subtle yet powerful changes in your thinking, attitudes, desires, and reactions. What once triggered anger may now invite patience. What once tempted compromise may now awaken conviction. What once mattered deeply may now feel less important. These shifts signal that God is shaping your inner world to support what he plans to release externally. As inner transformation begins, priorities naturally change. You may feel less drawn to superficial pursuits and more attracted to things that nurture growth, integrity, and purpose. Time becomes more intentional. Relationships become more discerning. Choices become more thoughtful. You begin to value peace over drama, wisdom over impulse, and obedience over popularity. These changes protect the future blessing from being corrupted by immaturity or misalignment. God understands that increase magnifies what already exists inside a person. If humility lives inside, influence amplifies humility. If discipline lives inside, opportunity strengthens discipline. But if insecurity or pride lives inside, success intensifies instability. That is why God carefully shapes character before expanding influence. Inner transformation often exposes emotional patterns that need healing. Old wounds, fears, and insecurities may surface unexpectedly. You may become aware of reactions that once felt normal but now feel misaligned with who you are becoming. This awareness is not meant to shame you, but to free you. God invites healing where awareness grows. Healing brings stability, clarity, and emotional strength. Without healing, unresolved pain can sabotage future relationships, leaders, IP, and responsibilities. God heals internally so the blessing does not reopen old scars or create unnecessary damage. As character deepens, integrity becomes more important than convenience. You may begin to sense conviction about small decisions that once felt insignificant. Honesty becomes non-negotiable. Accountability becomes welcomed rather than avoided. Excellence becomes a personal standard rather than an external requirement. These internal shifts demonstrate maturity and readiness for greater responsibility. Trust is built in small moments long before it is tested in big opportunities. Inner transformation also reshapes how you view success. Instead of chasing validation, recognition, or comparison, you begin to pursue faithfulness, growth, and impact. Your motivation becomes healthier and more sustainable. You learn to measure progress not only by achievements, but by obedience, consistency, and peace. This perspective protects you from burnout and performance-driven identity. When identity is rooted in God rather than outcomes, success becomes a tool rather than a burden. Patience increases as inner strength develops. You learn to wait without resentment and trust without anxiety. Delayed gratification becomes manageable because faith has matured. You no longer rush processes or manipulate outcomes. You understand that timing protects purpose. This patience becomes essential when responsibilities increase and decisions carry greater weight. Inner transformation strengthens emotional regulation. Reactions become more thoughtful. Words become more intentional. You learn to respond rather than react. This emotional maturity improves relationships, leadership effectiveness, and spiritual stability. Blessings often bring pressure, visibility, and responsibility. Without emotional maturity, stress can produce unhealthy responses. With emotional maturity, pressure produces wisdom. Another sign of inner alignment is increased self-awareness. You recognize strengths without arrogance and weaknesses without shame. You become teachable rather than defensive. Correction becomes an opportunity rather than a threat. Growth becomes a lifestyle rather than a season. This humility attracts wisdom and favor. God entrusts responsibility to those who remain teachable. Inner transformation also deepens spiritual sensitivity. You become more responsive to conviction, guidance, and peace. Your discernment sharpens. Decisions become aligned with long-term purpose rather than short-term comfort. You begin listening more carefully before acting. This spiritual awareness protects the blessing from impulsive choices and unnecessary conflict. As inner alignment continues, gratitude grows naturally. You become more appreciative of progress rather than only focused on what remains undone. Gratitude keeps the heart soft, humble, and joyful. It prevents entitlement and strengthens contentment. A grateful heart multiplies peace and attracts favor. Sometimes our transformation feels uncomfortable because it requires releasing old mindsets and habits. Change challenges identity. Growth stretches comfort, but discomfort and transformation is temporary, while the benefits are lasting. God gently replaces limiting beliefs with faith, fear with courage, and insecurity with confidence rooted in Him. When outer elevation finally arrives, inner stability allows you to steward it wisely. You will not be overwhelmed by responsibility or distracted by attention. You will remain grounded in values rather than driven by pressure. You will carry influence with humility rather than pride. You will manage success with gratitude rather than entitlement. Inner transformation ensures that the blessing strengthens rather than weakens your life. God's greatest investment is not in what you achieve, but in who you become. When character is rooted, purpose flows naturally. When the heart is aligned, opportunities become fruitful rather than fragile. Inner transformation is not a delay, it is divine protection. It ensures that when the blessing arrives, it does not simply elevate your position, but enriches your character, deepens your faith, and multiplies your impact for lasting purpose. There are seasons when God's preparation feels like loss, delay, or reduction rather than increase. And this is often where misunderstanding arises. Pruning and waiting are two of the most powerful yet uncomfortable ways God prepares a person for greater fruitful. SS. When something is removed from your life, whether a relationship, an opportunity, a familiar routine, or a long-held expectation, it can feel painful and confusing. You may question why God would take away something that once seemed good or necessary. Yet pruning is never about destruction. It is about redirection and multiplication. God removes what drains strength so what remains can grow deeper, healthier, and more productive. Pruning exposes attachments. It reveals where identity, security, or comfort may have been resting in temporary things rather than in God. When something is taken away, emotions surface and faith is tested. But this testing is purposeful. It realigns trust, strengthens dependence on God, and purifies motives. What once controlled your peace loses its grip, making space for greater freedom and stability. God is not removing joy. He is removing limitations that prevent greater joy from flourishing. Waiting works alongside pruning by strengthening patience and humility. Waiting stretches trust because outcomes are not immediate and answers are not always visible. In waiting, the heart learns to release control and surrender timing to God. This surrender refines faith from emotional excitement into steady endurance. Waiting teaches you how to remain faithful even when progress feels slow. It builds spiritual discipline and emotional maturity that quick success could never develop. Pruning and waiting also protect you from premature exposure. Receiving something before you are prepared can damage confidence, relationships, and responsibility. God understands timing better than human desire. What feels delayed is often protection. God is ensuring that when the blessing arrives, you will have the wisdom, stability, and maturity to steward it well. These seasons also deepen gratitude. When you experience reduction, you become more aware of what truly matters. You learn to appreciate simple blessings, quiet victories, and internal growth. Gratitude strengthens contentment and protects against entitlement. It anchors joy not in abundance, but in alignment with God's presence and purpose. Pruning can also reshape vision. When certain paths close, new directions become visible. God redirects focus toward what carries lasting impact rather than temporary comfort. This realignment clarifies calling and purpose. What once felt like loss becomes guidance. The closing of one door protects you from distractions that would have diluted your potential. Waiting strengthens discernment. You learn to listen more carefully, act more thoughtfully, and respond more patiently. Impulsive decisions decreases, wisdom increases. Waiting teaches you to trust God's voice rather than emotional urgency. This discernment becomes essential when greater opportunities arise. Emotionally, pruning and waiting refine resilience. You learn to navigate disappointment without bitterness and uncertainty without panic. Emotional stability grows as trust deepens. You begin to understand that peace does not depend on immediate outcomes, but on confidence in God's faithfulness. This stability prevents future pressure from overwhelming your spirit. Pruning also encourages simplicity. Life becomes less cluttered with unnecessary distractions, obligations, and pressures. Focus sharpens, energy increases. You become more intentional with time and relationships. Simplicity creates space for creativity, clarity, and spiritual depth. It allows you to move forward with greater freedom and less baggage. Waiting builds endurance. Perseverance strengthens as you remain faithful through delay. Each day of obedience compounds into spiritual strength. Faith matures from enthusiasm into consistency. This endurance equips you to sustain long-term responsibility and leadership. There are moments when pruning feels unfair and waiting feels exhausting. Doubt may whisper that nothing is happening, but beneath the surface, growth is occurring. Roots are deepening. Character is strengthening. Vision is clarifying. Trust is stabilizing. What cannot yet be seen is quietly forming. Pruning also reveals God's care. He is attentive to what hinders your growth and lovingly removes what could limit your future. Just as a gardener carefully trims a plant for health and productivity, God shapes your life with wisdom and intention. His timing and methods may not always make sense in the moment, but they always serve purpose. Waiting develops humility. You will learn that progress is not solely dependent on personal effort, but on divine grace and timing. This humility protects the heart from pride when blessings increase. Gratitude grows deeper because you recognize that what arrives is not owed but entrusted. As pruning and waiting continue, your trust in God becomes less conditional. You learn to worship without immediate reward and obey without visible confirmation. Faith becomes anchored in relationship rather than outcomes. This depth sustains long-term spiritual health. When the season shifts and the blessing finally emerges, you will notice greater clarity, gratitude, discipline, patience, and emotional stability. What once felt like loss will reveal itself as preparation. What once felt delayed will reveal itself as protection. You will carry the blessing with wisdom rather than haste, with humility rather than entitlement, and with faith rather than fear. Pruning and waiting are not empty seasons. They are shaping seasons. They remove what weakens and strengthen what remains. They build capacity for lasting fruitfulness rather than temporary success. When embraced with trust and obedience, these seasons prepare the heart, the mind, and the spirit to receive blessings that not only arrive, but remain and multiply for enduring purpose. One of the clearest signs that God is preparing you for a blessing is a growing hunger for his presence that goes beyond routine, habit, or obligation. What once felt like a discipline, salah, becomes a desire. Prayer no longer feels forced but necessary. Worship no longer feels like a task, but a refuge. Scripture no longer feels distant, but alive and personal. This inner longing is not accidental. It is God drawing you closer to himself so your heart becomes anchored before your circumstances change. When God prepares to increase responsibility, influence, or opportunity, he first deepens intimacy because intimacy sustains destiny. As this hunger grows, your awareness of God's nearness increases. You begin to sense peace guiding decisions, conviction shaping behavior, and clarity forming in moments of stillness. Instead of chasing emotional highs or external validation, you begin seeking consistency in God's presence. This stability strengthens faith so it does not depend on circumstances. Your relationship with God becomes rooted rather than reactive. Faith matures from excitement into endurance, from performance into authenticity. Increased hunger for God also reshapes priorities. Time becomes more valuable. Distractions begin to lose appeal. You become more intentional about protecting quiet moments, guarding mental space, and choosing environments that nurture spiritual growth. This is not isolation from life, but alignment within it. You learn to steward attention wisely because you recognize the power of focus. When attention is aligned, energy flows toward purpose rather than being scattered across unnecessary noise. As intimacy deepens, discernment sharpens. You become more sensitive to what builds your spirit and what drains it. Small compromises feel heavier because your conscience is more alive. Wisdom grows quietly as you learn to listen before acting. Decisions become guided by peace rather than pressure. This spiritual sensitivity protects the blessing from impulsive mistakes and unhealthy patterns. It teaches you to value long-term alignment over short-term satisfaction. A deeper hunger for God also strengthens emotional security. When identity becomes rooted in relationship rather than performance, confidence stabilizes. You are less shaken by opinions, delays, or temporary setbacks. Approval loses power over your decisions. Comparison fades. Contentment increases. This internal security protects you when blessings bring visibility, responsibility, or influence. Without secure identity, success can distort perspective. With secure identity, success becomes a tool rather than a trap. As hunger increases, gratitude naturally grows. You become more aware of God's daily faithfulness rather than only dramatic moments. Small victories carry meaning. Ordinary days carry peace. Gratitude anchors joy and presence rather than outcomes. This posture prevents entitlement and strengthens humility. A grateful heart remains open, teachable, and joyful regardless of circumstances. Increased hunger for God also cultivates obedience. You become more responsive to gentle promptings and quiet convictions. Obedience flows from love, rather than fear. Trust deepens because you recognize God's character more clearly. When trust grows, obedience feels less like sacrifice and more like alignment. This consistency prepares you for greater responsibility because faithfulness becomes a lifestyle rather than an occasional effort. As intimacy deepens, healing continues naturally. God's presence brings restoration to wounded areas of the heart. Peace replaces anxiety. Hope replaces discouragement. Clarity replaces confusion. Emotional stability increases because the heart is anchored in truth rather than fear. Healing ensures that future blessings do not reopen old wounds or create unhealthy dependency. Another powerful result of spiritual hunger is increased compassion for others. As you experience God's grace more deeply, empathy expands. You become more patient, forgiving, and understanding. Your prayers begin to include others more naturally. This outward flow prevents blessings from becoming self-centered. God prepares hearts to carry influence with humility and service rather than pride. Spiritual hunger also strengthens resilience. When challenges arise, you turn toward God rather than away from him. Prayer becomes your first response rather than your last resort. Peace sustains you under pressure. Faith remains steady through uncertainty. This resilience protects you from burnout and emotional instability when responsibilities increase. As this hunger continues, vision becomes clearer. You begin to sense direction without striving. Purpose unfolds naturally rather than forcefully. Your steps become ordered through quiet confidence rather than anxious planning. God's guidance becomes relational rather than mechanical. This clarity reduces confusion and strengthens alignment. Sometimes this hunger may feel intense because God is inviting deeper surrender. He may reveal areas that need to be released, healed, or corrected. This refining process strengthens intimacy rather than weakening it. The closer you draw to God, the more you desire alignment with his heart and ways. When the blessing finally arrives, intimacy with God becomes your anchor. Success will not replace dependence. Recognition will not replace humility. Opportunity will not replace obedience. You will carry the blessing with peace rather than pressure, with gratitude rather than entitlement, and with wisdom rather than impulse. Intimacy ensures longevity rather than temporary excitement. A growing hunger for God is one of the greatest protections and preparations for any blessing. It ensures that the heart remains aligned when circumstances shift. It builds strength that cannot be shaken by external change. It grounds identity in eternal truth rather than temporary success. When intimacy increases before opportunity, the blessing becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness rather than a distraction from his presence. When God is preparing you for a blessing, alignment, courage, and faithfulness often become the defining factors that determine whether you are ready to receive it fully. These three qualities work together to ensure that the blessing arrives not only in the right time, but also in the right condition, so it produces lasting impact rather than temporary gain. Alignment ensures that your heart, mind, and spirit are positioned according to God's will. Courage ensures that you act faithfully despite fear or uncertainty. Faithfulness ensures that your obedience is consistent even when results are delayed or invisible. Together, they prepare you to carry the blessing wisely, responsibly, and with integrity. Alignment begins with a recognition that God's purpose is greater than your plans. When you are aligned with him, your thoughts, priorities, and actions move in harmony with his will. You begin to see circumstances through God's perspective rather than through your own limited understanding. Decisions that once felt confusing or overwhelming become clearer because you are tuned to his guidance. Alignment protects you from pursuing opportunities that may seem appealing but are ultimately misaligned with your destiny. It prevents the blessing from becoming a burden or a distraction and ensures that every step taken positions you for maximum fruitfulness. Courage is inseparable from alignment. Even when your path is clear, fear often rises because growth demands risk. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act faithfully despite fear. When God is preparing you for a blessing, he will place situations before you that challenge comfort, certainty, and control. These moments test whether faith will guide action rather than emotion or impulse. Each step of courage strengthens trust, deepens reliance on God, and builds spiritual stamina. Courage allows you to embrace responsibility, take initiative, and step into opportunities that may seem daunting but are divinely appointed. Faithfulness is the consistency that bridges alignment and courage. It is easy to act courageously once, but ongoing faithfulness reveals the readiness of your heart. Faithfulness means honoring commitments, obeying God's guidance, and remaining steadfast in integrity, even when results are not immediately visible. God tests faithfulness in small, hidden ways before entrusting greater responsibilities. Your reliability in the unseen moments becomes a predictor of how you will handle increased influence, resources, or recognition. Faithfulness is the proof that your character has been shaped and that the blessing will be received with wisdom rather than squandered through neglect or impulsivity. Alignment, courage, and faithfulness also work together to strengthen discernment. When your heart is aligned, your mind is clearer and your spirit is tuned to God's voice. Courage allows you to act decisively without hesitation, trusting in God's guidance. Faithfulness ensures that each decision is not one-off, but part of a consistent pattern of obedience. Together, these qualities refine your ability to recognize the right opportunities, avoid pitfalls, and respond to challenges with wisdom. They create a framework in which blessings can be managed effectively and multiplied for long-term impact. Preparation through these qualities is often tested through real-life circumstances. Challenges, delays, opposition, and temptation serve as measures of readiness. Alignment ensures that your motivations remain pure and that your choices honor God's principles. Courage ensures that fear does not paralyze action or prevent opportunity. Faithfulness ensures that temporary obstacles do not derail long-term purpose. When you consistently practice these qualities, you develop resilience and maturity, which are critical for sustaining any blessing that comes your way. Another important aspect of alignment, courage, and faithfulness is that they protect the blessing from distortion. A blessing received without alignment can lead to pride, mismanagement, or distraction. A blessing approached without courage can result in missed opportunity or hesitation. A blessing pursued without faithfulness can be fleeting or unproductive. God shapes these qualities within you so that when the blessing arrives, it enhances your life, strengthens your influence, and produces lasting fruit rather than causing confusion, imbalance, or regret. These qualities also prepare you to steward the blessing responsibly. Alignment keeps you focused on purpose rather than personal gain. Courage equips you to navigate challenges and seize opportunities wisely. Faithfulness ensures consistency and reliability in managing resources, relationships, and influence. Together, they create a strong foundation for sustainable impact. God does not want to give you something you are unprepared to handle. He wants to ensure that when He entrusts increase, it multiplies through obedience, integrity, and discernment. Spiritual growth during preparation also cultivates gratitude, humility, and discernment. As you align your desires with God's, act courageously in obedience, and remain faithful through waiting, your character is shaped in ways that honor both God and others. Gratitude softens the heart, humility keeps pride in check, and discernment guides decisions wisely. These qualities ensure that the blessing you receive will not only benefit you, but also serve others and glorify God. When the moment of breakthrough arrives, alignment, courage, and faithfulness allow you to recognize it, embrace it, and manage it well. You will step into the blessing with confidence rooted in preparation rather than impulsiveness. You will carry influence with wisdom rather than entitlement. You will navigate challenges with strength rather than fear. The blessing will feel like a natural extension of the work God has been doing internally rather than a sudden or unmanageable gift. Ultimately, alignment, courage, and faithfulness are not just tools for preparation, they are the essence of readiness. God is not only interested in what you will receive, but in who you become in the process. These qualities ensure that when the blessing comes, it produces lasting impact, strengthens character, multiplies opportunities, and aligns your life with God's eternal purpose. They demonstrate that preparation is complete, that the heart is ready, and that the blessing will be received with wisdom, integrity, and joy. God's timing is perfect, and through alignment, courage, and faithfulness, you are fully equipped to step into all He has prepared for you.